Let's get things started! This hand of mine glows with an awesome power!
Greetings once again, my friends, and welcome back to the last episode of the G Gundam podcast. It's actually not going to be, because I actually do want to do like a final assessment of characters, things like that. So there will be one episode after this. I'm your host, Adam Mickelson, aka Drak. I hope everybody else is having an awesome week. And joining me today is my lovely wife, Andrea. Keep on saying lovely life, but you're not the representation of my life. Sorry, Andrea. I love you though. And we are talking the final 5 episodes of Mobile Fighter G Gundam. So it's been quite a journey. And this is the point where things come to a head. All the questions get answered, or at least all the questions that are going to get answered. I'm trying to remember, because the previous episode, I can't remember what exactly our plot threads were that we wanted to take, that we wanted to have happen. I think mine was related to Master Asia, and I can't remember what yours was. You remember?
No, I can't.
So at this point, like, maybe I'll have to bring that up in the final episode, just to see if we can kind of get a final satisfaction out of it. But we have 5 episodes to go over today, and basically the plot has to wrap itself up. So we're going to start things off with, first of all, are you excited to talk about these?
Yeah, I am.
You're not showing it. It's almost like we've been staying up all night. All right, so let's go ahead and talk about episode 45, Farewell Master, Master Asia's Last Breath. So this is the final battle of the 13th Gundam fight. All of the other contenders have been wiped out. The Dark Gundam has been dispatched. Technically, Noble Gundam has also been kind of eliminated, but she was not on Lantau Island when that happened. But the final contenders are Master and Pupil, Master Asia, the undefeated of the East, in Master Gundam, versus Domon Kashu, the upstart pupil of Master Asia, the one who won all of his bouts in the final round, and it's time for them to have their, what we think is, final clash. And it has a lot to live up to, considering the Guiana Highlands and the last fight they had there. So, actually, really quick, thoughts on that fight? Like, do we consider that to be an epic fight of G Gundam, the Guiana Highlands showdown between Domon and Master Asia?
Well, you would always have an epic fight between those two.
Well, I'm saying, like, compared to, say, because we've done a lot of praise for Dragon Gundam and things like that, would we consider that fight to be up there?
Well, yeah.
Okay, so at that point, we have this fight being set up, and the way that we know that it's basically being set up is the Dark Gundam is destroyed. Master is livid at this, kind of like how he was in the Guiana Highlands, where he was absolutely just livid against Domon. And now we actually start to learn a little bit of why, because these are actually questions you brought up in previous episodes. Why does Master care about the Dark Gundam? Why is he the villain? Like, it doesn't make sense, right? Do you remember asking these?
No.
Of course you don't, because, that's the way it goes.
Mm-hmm.
But you did. And everybody can point out in the podcast that you did.
Okay.
Because you're just like, I don't remember all this stuff, why Master was going to be the villain. And this is the episode that technically answers a lot of that. And a lot of the focus is on Domon versus Master. But I want to get a couple of things out of the way first, because there are scenes that are happening while all of this is going on that are kind of important. First of all, yay, nobody died. We confirmed that Shibidi, George, Argo, and Saisaishi are all very much alive. Their Gundams are pretty trash, though, given their fights with Raven Gundam, Grand Gundam. Yeah, it kind of makes sense, right? Like, their Gundams are thrashed, but they are very intent on watching the battle between Domon and Master. And do you understand why they are? They don't really explain it very well, but do you kind of get why they are excited about watching watching Master versus Domon?
I'm pretty sure that they are just thinking it's going to be the greatest thing ever to see.
It's basically the pinnacle of what they've been waiting on this whole year. Because remember, this entire Gundam fight has been lasting a year. And everything has been building up to this moment, this final clash. And sure, they wanted to be a part of it, but now they're just happy being witnesses of that, which kind of makes sense. Like, if you got eliminated, you'd still want to see who the champion is, right? Because you would want to set eyes on them. And so in that case, like, we have this moment where all of the support crews are basically screaming, let's get out of here, but they are refusing. They will not move. They are going to be witnesses to the end of the 13th Gundam fight. And I actually kind of like that moment because it creates a little bit more of an anchor for a lot of people. Like, I'm not the biggest fan of George, but I like the fact that he's willing to bear witness to who actually wins the Gundam fight, not just to shuffle alliance members. I'm pretty sure if this was a bout between, I don't know, I'm throwing out people, Mermaid Gundam and Grizzly Gundam, they'd still watch, just because they want to bear witness to who is going to win. Although, the stakes here are much, much, much better than that. The other thing that's going on during this time is we thought that Rising Gundam and Rain had taken out Alan B and Volter Gundam, because they did aim at the source of the DG cells in her body, and that was the Berserker system in Volter Gundam. So, unfortunately, that's not the case, because she destroyed it, but Alan B's still in Berserker mode, and she's still going crazy. So at that point, Rising Gundam is still trying to, or Rain is still trying to take care of Alan B, and it's looking pretty grim for a lot of that. She's causing a lot of destruction. And Rain just doesn't understand why the Berserker system hasn't turned off, aside from the assumption she has that the Dark Gundam cells are not allowing the Berserker system to turn off in her. So basically, like, taking the waves that she's already been receiving and just using those. What did you think in regards to this? Like, that she's still going berserk even though the system isn't there, and that Rain's feeling kind of hopeless about being able to get her out of this.
Like, what in particular?
Well, like, are you sharing in her thoughts of hopelessness? Like, why is this still happening?
Well, yeah, you would probably be questioning why is it not haven't stopped. That where's
did the thought cross your mind that the only way that this could possibly stop is to kill Alan B? Because it's brainwaves. Like, there's not a whole lot you can do in that. Like, the brain is a complicated place.
Well, unless there was another system running somewhere elsewhere that she hasn't thought of.
No.
I'm just saying that could have been.
No, it's not, because the Neo-Sweden Berserker system's still destroyed at this point, and the only one that was working was Wong's, but there's no longer a receiver for it, because the receiver was in Volter Gundam. So at that point, like, so you didn't think that Alan B might have to die?
No.
Okay. Because that was kind of my assessment when I first watched this. I'm like, oh, wow, they're actually going to kill Alan B after having people kind of get used to her and like her.
I thought maybe she could just knock her really
Plus,
hard.
That would be a really, really bad way to end this kind of jealousy arc that's going on between them, right? We don't want to see Rain have to kill somebody.
No, I thought maybe she would just had to knock her out really hard to...
Well, you kind of got your wish, because basically the way that they solve this is when I can't remember where they were at this given moment. I think they were in the city, but Rising Gundam has its hand bitten by Volter Gundam, and Rain just says, okay, we're going to do this, and gets ready an ultimate bullseye rising arrow in the mouth of Volter Gundam, which is pretty much a guarantee we're probably going to hit the cockpit at this point. So that's kind of a freaky thing to consider. And it's successful, and she does get Alan B out of there, but Alan B is unconscious. It looks like she might have a pulse. I can't remember if she questions whether or not she has a pulse, but it looks like maybe she's just unconscious. She might be all right. We're not entirely sure, because Rain needs to get her to a hospital. And she kind of resolves to wait for Domon until... Or actually, no, at this point, she's fairly hopeless. She thinks that Alan B is going to pass on. And out of nowhere comes her dad saying that no, they just need to treat the Dark Gundam cells. They haven't reached the brain yet. So at that point, they need to get her to a hospital and treat her. Afterwards, her dad admits he will take full responsibility for this entire endeavor. So despite the fact that we know Ulube is also responsible, he's going to shoulder all of the blame himself, which in turn kind of sets a weird plot thread in motion that we'll get into in a little bit. But what did you think of Dr. Mikamura taking full responsibility for all of this? He, like, the way he makes it sound, he's not going to rat anybody else out. He's gonna be the Hitler of this situation.
I mean, I think it's great and all, but he should
rat out Ulube, right?
Well, yeah, because it's like,
that's like the only time I don't agree with Dr. Mikamura is that, like, I think he should, even though he does share responsibility, he should rat out his co-conspirators. But he's just basically saying, I'll shoulder all of this burden alone. Like, no, that's a very Law and Order way of handling things, and I hate it.
mm-hmm.
Because it's in a weird way unaccountable, because you don't acknowledge that maybe you had help.
It's just like you don't want to get others into trouble, but at the same time, you're just going to be sitting there and letting them get away with it, and you're like...
But I don't even think he's doing that because of that. And we'll get into this in a little bit because it's going to have kind of this after effect on Rain, where because he wrecked his friendship with Dr. Kashu, because he wrecked his relationship with his daughter, he does feel like he's solely responsible, but he's not. Mm-hmm. Like, I get internally why he feels that way, but factually, he's not. And it just makes me think like, oh, okay, well, then you're just going to make this worse because you're going to go and get punished, but Ulube's still going to be out there, kind of thing. And it always irritates me when I see characters doing that.
Well, yeah.
In some cases, it's honorable, but in this case, it's stupid because there's still another monster out there.
Yeah, and it's like he's going to let that guy get away with it.
All right. So let's cut to the main event. Domon versus Master. And a lot happens here. A lot of this episode is Domon versus Master. We find out a lot of the bitterness of Master Asia. So, like, I actually want to say, up until this point, we haven't really had the real Master come out. We've seen the supportive grandpa, and we've seen the weird twister mustache villain, but now we get to see the real Master, or the real Master Asia, underneath all of the masks. This is him at his core. And we find out some very cruel things. One, his reason for joining with the Dark Gundam is to restore the Earth. He somehow saw the potential of what the Ultimate Gundam could do and in restoring the Earth. However, here's one flaw in his logic. Remember when we said in the previous episode, when the Ultimate Gundam came to Earth, it suffered a malfunction? During its malfunction, it has determined that human life is not... It can't survive if Earth is to be restored. And so at that point, Master Asia goes right along with that, saying, oh, this Gundam is wise beyond its years. It knows what needs to happen. Humans must die. Which in turn kind of creates a real rift between him and Domon. We'll get to that in a minute, but I just want to get into your take. You know, as a viewer, the Dark Gundam is malfunctioning. Mm-hmm. You know it's a malfunction. Like, is Master just freaking crazy because he's just willing to take this malfunctioning Gundam at its word, so to speak? Like, this is how it has to happen?
Well, I'm pretty sure it's strange. I mean, after all, it's supposed to be like a machine, and yet...
Could you make the argument that maybe Master's not thinking straight?
Possibly.
Okay. Well, I mean, you sound like you don't believe that.
Well, I just don't know why he would be taking the word of a Gundam that's practically a machine.
And that he acknowledges is malfunctioning.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of a weird deal. But he then explains that because of that, because he met the Dark Gundam, he then decided to embrace the plan And after Guyana, he immediately commits himself to finding a new core life unit because obviously Kyoji isn't going to do it anymore. And his proposition was that Domon be the new core life unit, and that he was going to make Domon into the strongest fighter he ever could through the shadows, and that was going to be the new core life unit. We covered this in the previous episode, but that was his theory. And because Domon destroyed the Dark Gundam, now it's not even possible, and you could almost say, like, Master kind of gives into a very big wave of despair. We're not entirely sure why, aside from he wanted to help restore the Earth because of all the destruction that we've seen throughout this whole series. And he explains all of that, calling Domon a stupid pupil for not noticing all of this, and that the Dark Gundam was the only way to solve it. I mean, you know, you could go out and pick up some of the garbage, rebuild some of the buildings. You didn't think of that? It had to be the Dark Gundam wiping out humanity. That's how it had to be solved. Kind of senile. Kind of not thinking straight. And we get to have some really good arguments between him and Domon. I especially like that Domon is the one, his pupil, who he's constantly calling a stupid pupil this entire time. But his pupil points out one single thing that he never considered is, like, in order to restore Earth and nature, you have to acknowledge that humanity is part of nature. Like, humanity is part of nature just as much as anything else. So the fact that you're willing to leave that out, you're not completely restoring nature. And we actually get to see that actually does hit Master pretty hard. Like, he hadn't considered that humanity is a part of nature.
Yeah.
So I like the fact that Domon, who's considered kind of the hardhead of this show and doesn't really get a whole lot of the philosophy that's being thrown at him, he's the one that points out this crucial fact. The other thing that I like is that there's a long discussion that is happening here about Master's hatred for the Gundam fight. And we haven't really gone into this, our thoughts on what the Gundam fight is and whether or not it actually does solve the problem. In fact, Master brings up that one of the things it's called is the ideal war, where it's basically like, this is the way to solve all conflict, is just to have this Gundam fight happen every 4 years to determine who gets to rule the colonies, kind of thing. So what did you think about Master's thoughts on the Gundam fight? Like, were they accurate, or were they just more crazy ramblings? Because this whole concept is kind of silly, right?
Yeah, silly too.
Everything is determined by a tournament in order to avoid war, but people have died during the Gundam fight. Except most of those people have been, like, innocent bystanders.
That's just really sad, especially if you're trying to determine on who's gonna be in charge of
Would you call this the ideal war?
No.
I would say that there's no such thing as the ideal war. Because, like, the ideal war would be avoiding all kinds of casualties, but you can't do that. But Domon does bring up a good point. It is better than having thousands of lives lost.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an ideal way to look at it, but we don't really know in terms of innocent bystanders how many die during these Gundam fights. Because you can't help but wonder, like, your Gundam fight happens in the middle of the streets of Paris. You know somebody's out there getting baguettes or something. And so they're caught in this fight now. And they're probably going to suffer from it. So, like, you have to consider that concept, and then that kind of fuels the debate of, like, is this really the right way to solve it? Is just to have everybody fight it out, and then have one nation lead us all for 4 years, and then do it all over again. And they've done it 12 times before this.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting way to look at because Gundam is known for its anti-war messages. And so at that point, like, the concept of this is very silly, but it is, like, approached from a philosophical end. Would it just be better to to just end all war by having something like this. I'd almost think it wouldn't end all war, because what happens if a nation is bitter and doesn't accept the defeat?
Yeah, and then you'll end up starting a war.
Yeah, like this is way too overly written. Let's put it that way, because there's a lot of stuff that you and I can poke out of. Is, you know, you don't think that somebody else's government is really bitter about how Neo-Egypt lost to a mummy that technically wouldn't have risen from the grave if not for Neo-Japan? It makes you think, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. So we have a lot of these discussions happening in the middle of this. And also in the meantime, we are seeing Master and Burning Gundam going blow for blow, like using each other's techniques. We actually get to see Burning Gundam do the launching technique from Master's end. Mm-hmm. What is it? It's like Senjoku Hao Denaden. We get to see them both do it, minus the ignite. But instead of the ignite, we get this big whirlwind of their power.
That was weird.
And the weirdest part of it was seeing echoes of their faces just going around the whirlwind. That was weird.
I know.
Weird as hell. So we have that happen. We have them clashing constantly, and everybody looking on in admiration, minus the four kings of the Dark Gundam. We don't know where Mikolo is. We don't know where Chapman is. We're guessing they're both dead. Allenby is off with Rain. So at that point, like, the only ones that are really onlookers at this point are Argo, Chimity, George, and Saisaishi. And both are just stoked with what is happening and all the clashes that are happening. And it all comes down to one final clash. They both decide that they must solve this with their Sekiha Tenkyoken. So they must go against each other and both power up to hyper mode, which is really weird seeing that happen with Master because he doesn't wear a fight suit. He's just in his regular garb. And then you get to see his hair go from gray to gold, his mustache go from gray to gold. And I'm not saying it's weird for Domon to see the gold hair and all that, but it just looks weird for Master to have that. And we have that final kind of beam struggle between the two of them. And for the most part, Master is winning until he says the right thing against Domon, and Domon is actually able to clinch the victory. But during this time, while all of these clashes are happening, we start to notice something with Domon. He's noticing, you remember the adage here, all fighters communicate with their fists, right? Well, he just so happens to notice that Master's fists are crying. They are filled with deep sorrow. And this kind of affects his fighting style all the way up until the final Sekiha Tenkyoken, when as soon as Domon has clenched the victory, you kind of see the original grandpa-ish Master come back and say, "It's official, you have now succeeded me as the King of Hearts," and then his Master Gundam is destroyed. To which we get one of the most touching moments of this episode afterwards, which is Master and Domon, along with the other Shuffle Alliance members, are at a beach where the wreckage of Master Gundam is, and Burning Gundam is there, and Master's basically breathing his last breath. They are both there. Domon's trying to comfort him, and he's trying to tell you, like, I never saw it from your perspective, but you're right, Domon. We are just as much a part of nature as anything else, and we have to secure that. And the way that the Dark Gundam was going to do this was wrong. And we also get to have a touching moment of, you asked this question a while back, as to if Master ever, as a servant of the Dark Gundam, ever took on a DG cell. And we'd never seen it up until this point, but then he reveals by opening up his shirt, by the way, masculine old man, shall we point out, he has never taken a single Dark Gundam cell. He followed the Dark Gundam willingly. And you get to have a moment where Domon kind of has that realization of that he was never corrupted. He was never evil because the Dark Gundam told him to. he was himself. And that kind of comforts Domon in a weird way. And we get to have that final moment of them looking out into the sunset and quoting their line again, "The school of the undefeated of the East, the winds of the king, Senshin, Keretsu, Tempa, Kyoran. Look, the East is burning red." And with that last breath, Master passes away. And Domon is distraught by this, obviously. Domon's had a lot of death in one day. He's had to kill his brother. He's had to kill his master. And what also helps with this episode, it comes in between all of this happening, but this is actually a trait of Gundam, where when somebody is near death or dying, like or dead, they will basically have what I like to call like the afterlife experience in that, where they start randomly floating in space, and either they are just clothed in their fight suit or their flight suit rather, or they're naked, because it happens. Yes, many a boob has been shown in moments like these. And in this one, usually it's for the main characters, but this one was reserved for Master Asia. And you actually get to see the former Shuffle Alliance come back. And because they've been on the other side, they now truly understand what Master was doing. And this is where we learn a lot about Master Asia and why he chose to follow the Dark Gundam. Is apparently the Shuffle Alliance had been debating whether or not this was the ideal way to solve war. And so Master decided to enter the 12th Gundam fight to see if it was, except something happened. The second he won, he looked back on all the destruction that he had wrought, getting to this point, and immediately was torn apart. His heart was broken, because look at all the nature that he had destroyed to get to this point. And you actually get to see a really cool defining moment for Master, that because he's like, what good are the Shuffle Alliance if we can't stop this? And I actually kind of wonder if one of the reasons he gave up the King of Hearts crest so willingly to Domon was partially because of self-loathing. He didn't want to hold that crest anymore because of what he'd done. He didn't feel worthy of it. Let's put it that way. And so at that point, we learned like a lot of the stuff that led him to the Dark Gundam was because of the despair and self-loathing that he's been dealing with since he won the previous Gundam fight. And I just want to ask you about that, like learning Master's backstory like that. What did that change for you with his character?
Probably, I guess he just wasn't as bad as we all thought he was, but he just had a weird way of approaching it.
It is kind of a weird deal. I almost want to call it Darth Vader-esque, because his story is very much the road to hell is sometimes paved with good intentions. And a lot of the disgust that he felt after being able to attain his knowledge eventually just kind of fueled him into being a horrible person, a bad guy, if you will, but not necessarily for... I don't even want to call him a bad guy more than an antagonist or something to that extent.
Anti-hero.
I don't even want to call him an anti-hero because I don't think it even qualifies there, because that would say like he was trying to save the day but for his own means, and that's not what he was trying to do here. He was trying to destroy the world. And part of him knew that. So it's definitely one of those ideal moments where you get to see like all of the facade, all of the armor come off, and you get to see the character for what they are. And I like that they did that with Master Asia, because there's a lot of reasons to admire Master Asia. There's a lot of reasons to hate him too, but I think it all kind of works out in the end. And I do actually like that they had a moment where Master, the one big regret that Master has in all of this is that if only he hadn't met Domon in Shinjuku. If he hadn't done that, he probably would have been able to carry on with this plan. and be able to destroy humanity with the Dark Gundam. But then fate intervened and sent his pupil to him. And that changed how all of this was going to go. And that's pretty much kind of the wrap up for this episode. There's a lot to go over there, but final thoughts on Farewell Master, Master Asia's Last Breath. 5 out of 5 for me. It's actually one of my favorite episodes of G Gundam because it gives you insight that wasn't given there before. We're always taught about how great a martial artist he is and everything like that, but it never fit that he was just this servant of the darkness until now. Then you get to see it from Master Asia's perspective and why he joined with the Dark Gundam, and now everything makes sense. But I also like the fact that he was willing enough to admit he was wrong. And he gets to have that final moment with Domon, and they get to end their relationship together as master and pupil, which for a while there in this series, we kind of wondered if that was going to happen. So 5 out of 5 for me. It's one of my favorite episodes of G Gundam.
I would go 5 out of 5 too.
Were you crying during the end?
It was more...
It's okay to say you were crying.
I wasn't saying it was crying per se.
I was crying. I always do.
But it was just kind of like, I'm surprised Domon was like, this is just so insane, like, it's like, you're good one day, and then you're bad, and it's like, it's like, oh my gosh.
But now you get insight into that. To why he was thinking this way. So let's go ahead, because we have 4 other episodes to get into. Let's go ahead and get into the next episode, which is Reign's Crisis, Return of the Dark Gundam. So this is another aftermath episode of all of the Gundam fight. Domon has been declared the winner. He has earned the title Gundam of Gundams, and Neo Japan gets the right to rule all of space and Earth for 4 years. And the way it starts off is very Return of the Jedi-esque, because we are coming in on Domon burning Master Gundam. Like, every time I see that scene, I almost want to put the... because it's really appropriate there. I also like that you have Funsaiki in the background, just kind of neighing in the background, and Domon's just like, it's okay, Funsaiki, let it out. This is the only time that we will cry for Master. This is the only time. And they're both just kind of crying. And actually, what's really kind of touching is the Shuffle Alliance members are too, to some extent, and even the support crews. But that's not the only thing that's going on right now. At least for them, it is. But we then cut to the hospital, where they've kind of resolved the Allenby situation. She is in a hospital room receiving treatment. And from what we can hear from Dr. Mikamura, she's had all of the Dark Gundam cells taken out of her body. And Reign is kind of sitting there supporting, but then he says, I'm going to go and accept my blame, to which we get to hear Reign do, in my opinion, one of the stupidest things she has done in this series to date, and in fact, the stupidest thing. And it kind of sets up the final arc of the series. Because her father is one of the people that started this whole affair to begin with, she, as his daughter, shares the responsibility.
Oh my goodness gracious.
I'm going to give you the floor really quick. What do you think of Reign's of Reign's thought pattern when it came to this?
I mean, I get it when she left him the first time, because she felt very bad about letting, Allenby go, and he entrusted her, and she walks away like she doesn't deserve to be.
Can I tell you a story really quick of how I reacted to this? When I saw it for the first time, I immediately, because I get, you can kind of see it. You've watched movies with me before. I get invested, and I give my opinions right off the bat. I'm like, the black stereotype of a horror movie, how they're the ones like, oh, don't you dare go in that door. I'm kind of that guy. And you kind of like it, but then there are also points where you get frustrated. When I saw this for the first time, it was like 2 a.m. I was watching the DVD because for some reason I could never see these episodes on Cartoon Network, these last 4. And I remember seeing her reasoning for that, getting up, and keep in mind, in our house, there was 2 people awake during 2 a.m. and 2 in the morning. It was me, and it was my older sister, who was down in the basement and kind of was off. She had her own little apartment kind of down there, and so she was living there. And I got so mad at Rain for her reasoning here that out of nowhere throughout the house, you could hear this scream, "You stupid bitch!" It was loud enough that my sister came upstairs, and a couple of seconds later was like, "Hey, language!" Because she never liked that if I used that term. Most women don't. And so it was loud enough that she could hear me, and she got mad enough. She came upstairs to chastise me. And I like, as soon as she's like, "Hey, language," immediately I bust a gut laughing because I totally forgot she was there, and she just kind of went back downstairs utterly confused. So, but yeah, like that's what happened. I was so mad at her that I just screamed bloody murder. So go on. I just wanted to tell that story because I think you'd like it.
But for her to decide, like she felt like betrayed by her own dad for doing all these hoard things and all that stuff. Felt like she didn't know him.
But the way she's talking about it, you'd think she was jealous of Dr. Kashu. Come on. But
now she's like, "Oh, I guess I can accept for what my father did. I'm just going to join his bandwagon." And it's like, why? You have no obligation to
The sins of the father are not the sins of the son in this case, or daughter in this case. They're not.
So it's like you had nothing to do with it.
If anything, you should be pissed at him because your year has been affected by this.
Just because you're related to the guy does not mean you feel like you're obligated to take what he did onto you.
Like, she should be mad at him. Mm-hmm. Like, because of you, my medical career had to go put on hold because I had to go help my best friend go free his father that you imprisoned.
Oh, that was probably a stupid thing for her to just assume to do.
Yeah.
I'm kind of surprised.
And because of this, she cannot see Domon anymore.
That's almost as bad as her always saying, "We're not on speaking terms anymore.
I'm gonna dump you." And there's no evidence that they're even remotely boyfriend and girlfriend up until that point. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, okay, this is stupid. Because of your father's sins, you can no longer see your best friend. Like, just put yourself in those shoes. Like, you forbade yourself from seeing your best friend because, I don't know, your dad refused to buy a beer for him.
I mean, who knows? Maybe Rain could have explained to Domon what his thoughts were about what his father...
She could have asked what his thoughts were.
And if he...
And he's too... Like, I now get to say this, but there are points when you have to argue that she is just as fucking hard-headed as Domon. Oh my gosh! She understands fighters far better than she thinks because she's just as fucking hard-headed as them. I'm not usually one for abusing women, but Rain ignites a fire in me that makes me want to beat the crap out of her. Because I hate stupidity like this, especially stupid writing like this. Because my dad did this to your dad, I can never see you anymore. Fuck that noise! Oh my gosh. Because it's also this weird cop-out to try and make things more Romeo and Juliet-esque, and it never works. It never works because you don't have the power that is Romeo and Juliet in there. So, yeah, she makes up her mind on this one. When Domon finally comes back and he has to go do all of these parades and such, you can see that he is definitely dealing with some inner turmoil. He's not happy about how this ended. He's not happy that he had to sacrifice both his brother and his master to save his father. And he doesn't want to be a part of all of the parade that's going on. In fact, he's like, you can kind of hear his inner monologue of like, he sees how Master sees this now. And what's kind of the clincher is Minister Corrado coming up and congratulating Domon on a hard-fought victory. And Domon ain't taking any of that. It's basically, I like to call it, that's the moment, that's the straw that broke the camel's back, because he immediately jumps off Burning Gundam and runs off. You know, like he usually does with Corrado. No wonder Corrado's pissed at him. He, like, every time they're immediately within an inch of each other, it's like a magnet. And Domon has to leave. But really the reason is because, remember, they made a promise right before the finals, is that Domon wanted to see Rain. And this is kind of how Domon finds out that he will never see Rain again, because of what her father did. Actually, I don't even know if he knew that part. He's just like, I will never see you again, Domon. And he gets to spend most of this episode dumbfounded. It's like, why? Why don't I get to see you ever again? So much so that when people kind of come over to try and cheer him up, he's just kind of dumbfounded. He doesn't really know how to react to it. Aside from, well, that's... And I hate his reaction too. Well, it's Rain's choice.
Yeah.
Bull crap. You got given no reason, and frankly, you deserve one, considering you guys had to spend a year together. You know, you need an answer here. And I this is one of those times where in relationships, I don't tend to have this viewpoint, but in Domon's case, he deserved a fucking answer. He did. Especially since he probably would have looked at Rain and said, "You're stupid." Which she probably needed to hear. So one of his reactions is to go and check in on Allenby. And Allenby, I think, is the one that actually breaks the news to him.
Yeah, she's the one who tells.
Yeah, that's right. Because as soon as they're getting ready to leave, Neo Japan comes in and arrests Dr. Mikamura. And what also starts happening, especially during the parade, is we start to notice a bunch of shuttles coming down to Neo Hong Kong. Not really sure what they're about, but they're coming, and some people are sitting there going, we didn't think that there were shuttles scheduled today. Corrado's also interested because they are from Neo Japan, and he is not aware of them, which then shows us at the captain's chair of this fleet is Major Ulube. Huh. And he looks evil now. He does not look he doesn't look like half of the pacifist or passive guy he's looked this entire time. Now he looks fucking evil.
Mm-hmm.
So he officially comes down to Earth and immediately takes his fleet to go rescue the remains of the Dark Gundam from Lantau Island, which a lot of people are kind of 50-50 about. Like, should we be ever trying to dig that thing back up? Should Neo Japan be able to take hold of it again? Is it really even right for any country to take a hold of it? And nobody really knows that answer, but Ulube doesn't give a shit. He's going to take it back. And what makes it even better is that one of his troopers actually finds Wang Yunfa's answer to it, or like his notes on the Dark Gundam. We actually haven't covered Wang a little bit, but in the aftermath of the fight between Vulture Gundam and Rising Gundam, it just so happens that the last strike where Vulture Gundam ends up is Wang's office, like the big chessboard where we've been seeing him putting the matches together. And basically Vulture Gundam kind of crashes into it, and we're kind of presuming Wang is dead up until that point. But we were able to secure his notes. And we find out the reason that he wanted Allenby to be the core life unit instead of Domon. So Ulube is going through Wong's notes, and he finds a very key point that Wong found with the Dark Gundam. So the Dark Gundam requires a core life unit to be able to work. And the example that we have of that is that Kyoji was used as a core life unit, and it didn't really work out. Instead, we ended up with kind of an imperfect Dark Gundam, a bug-like Dark Gundam that didn't really do any of what was intended. And Wong actually came up with the reason, and it's actually why he chose Allenby for it, is that he doesn't think that a male is a good core life unit for the Dark Gundam. His theory, in fact, was because in order to create life, you have to have something that can. And in his case, it was that you had to have a woman be the core life unit. Because who better than the gender with the womb, the creator of life? And so in this case, he was going to use Allenby to be the core life unit, not just because she was a very competent fighter. Maybe he had the same philosophy, but because she was a woman, and so she would be able to understand it. Or she would be a much better pick. Ulube then decides, okay, well, I just so happen to have a woman here that I can use for the core life unit, and starts eyeing Rain. At that point, Ulube betrays Dr. Mikamura and gives up Rain to the Dark Gundam and makes Rain the core life unit. To which Dr. Mikamura tries to protect her, is shot in the process, and in turn is very dead set on saving his daughter from this dark fate. Like, that she is going to be the core life unit of the Dark Gundam, that it's going to be the vessel of the true resurrection of the Dark Gundam, and immediately tries to reach out to Domon, saying, you must save Rain. You must save her, otherwise we are going to have a whole other slew of problems, and she is going to be ended up in servitude to the Dark Gundam. Please save my daughter. And it just so happens that Domon's coming back to the boat where, like, it's on, he's sending a radio frequency to everybody, so to make sure that Domon hears this. And it just so happens that all the Shuffle Alliance members have heard this radio transmission, and Domon is walking back from the hospital after seeing Allenby. To which Allenby starts giving some very worthwhile advice. You ought to go chase after Rain. You ought to go do that. And by the way, I'm also going to point out one thing that has never made sense to me in 90s anime, but now we have no problem with this, is whenever... Because when we see Allenby, like, she's pretty injured. Enough so that she can't really even put on her pajama shirt properly. And in order to cover up that she has, well, lovelies, they just basically have bandages all over her chest. Which is something that has been kind of stereotypical of feudal Japanese women, where they would have that too. But now in modern day, like, it almost felt like in the 90s, they couldn't ever consider drawing a bra. Okay, like, they could never ever consider it. And now the anime has no problem doing that. I don't know why. But this is one of those cases where I'm just like, you know, that would have actually been a great time to show that Allenby was a woman, and to be able to show, like, you know, maybe she is pretty hot underneath all that. And I get the reason why they didn't. She's injured. But it's just like, oh. Because the problem is, most of the time when you're drawing her, she doesn't really have feminine characteristics. She doesn't really. She's kind of like, a lot of people don't like that I make fun of her by calling her being drawn like a little boy from Digimon, but she doesn't really. When she's in the fight suit, she does. Like, she has curves and it makes sense, but the rest of the time they're so intent on drawing her like a boy. I don't know why. I just don't get it. But then again, we're also going to get into another thing that I have a problem with Allenby too. So she kind of tries to talk some sense into Domon. He heads back to the boat and hears the radio transmission, and is immediately set. He's going to go get Rain back. He immediately boards Burning Gundam and gets out the Lotus rocket so that he can clear the atmosphere. Except then he is interrupted by Walter Gundam? Wait, wasn't that Allenby's? Except this time, it's piloted by Wang Yunfa. And how do they show this? Well, first of all, he's covered in tentacles. That's always a good image, right? But this is the one thing I love about this whole scene. They reveal Wong, and then they have Dark Gundam cells create this tentacle that eventually becomes his hipster sunglasses.
Why does he need that?
Fuck! You don't need that anymore. You're a servant of the darkness. And no, he still has to have that. Still has to have it because he has to look cool, damn it. So he destroys the Lotus core unit. So now, oh, you're never going to clear the atmosphere, Domon. Except off in the distance, Domon can hear. Yeah, that's my bad imitation of a horse. Fun Psyche has come to the rescue, as this is basically Master's inheritance to Domon. Fun Psyche. And it just so happens that Fun Psyche works with Burning Gundam and offers him a way into space. And we get to see once again Fun Psyche don his horse fight suit.
Why is the horse need?
Is it better the second time?
It's weirder the second.
So stupid. I love it. I love it so much. I love it because it's so stupid. You had to have a horse have a fight suit. All right. I'll give you that. But bottom line is, so they have a little bit of a fight between Walter Gundam and Burning Gundam. And we think that we're going to get a burning finger and a heat end. But instead, Fun Psyche gets to land the final blow by literally kicking Walter Gundam's head off. I love that moment. Just like, I'm not going to fight this guy. Fun Psyche, you do it. Bam! It's like, okay.
He looks like he wants to do it, but Fun Psyche's like, forget that. I'm going to kick it.
I'm going to kick his head off. And there you go. That's how you know Fun Psyche's a strong character. And that's pretty much kind of wrapping up this episode as we head into space to deal with the newest threat, which is the Dark Gundam, but with Rain as the core life unit. So, final thoughts on Rain's Crisis, Return of the Dark Gundam.
I probably would give it a 4.
Okay, and your reason?
Well, my reason was, why on earth did it take that long to decide to use a woman for the Dark Gundam when it could have been resurrected?
Because obviously Wang Yunfa was the only smart guy here.
Yeah, but why did he wait that long to not actually execute that?
It's very true. You do have a point. He had Allenby for what looks like days.
And then he decides to use her to
do Walter Gundam instead.
Yeah. Cuz it's like, I'm pretty sure Kyoji could have almost been spared his life from getting killed and just throw in Allenby.
Well, he could have basically been thrown away like with the trash.
Well, yeah, but
kind of thing.
But then he could have just thrown Allenby in there, and then the Dark Gundam could have been...
Yeah. Wong is a lover of drama.
It's like you could have had the Gundam...
I think what Wong wanted to have happen was that he wanted to prove Master wrong, and then as soon as that happened, have Allenby willingly step into the cockpit of the Dark Gundam, because maybe he thought he had more control over her than he did. But I don't see Allenby and the Berserker system wanting to do that. Because as we saw, it was only like magnifying her emotions, and she wasn't going to follow anybody's orders other than maybe Domon's. Because we found out that's how we found out she loved Domon. So,
Oh yeah, but still, he just ended up getting...
I am not going to be as charitable as you. I'm going to give this a 3. And the reason being is all of the stupid bullcrap that had to set up to this. Rain saying, "My father's sins are mine, ergo I can't see you again." Wong not just plopping Allenby into the cockpit from the beginning and winning this overall game. this whole thing could have easily just been Wong Yun-fa being kind of the final villain of this whole deal, and instead they decided, no, we need to have an arc with Ulube because we've been setting him up as this passive guy. Oh wait, he's a villain now. It's all, there's so many jumps, so many leaps in logic in this episode. It's bothersome. This is another one of those examples of, if you had just spread this out, it would have been so much better. But instead, you plopped all of it onto the plate, and now it's all a greasy heap of mess.
Well, then it just kind of makes you wonder why, if they wanted to make Major Ulube the top villain of all of this, then it might as well have not had Wong figure out that the Dark
In
Gundam...
essence, I actually kind of wonder if Ulube should have even, in retrospect, if Ulube should have even been the villain. Should have even been a villain in this. Because in a lot of cases, like, you made him so passive that nobody really cared. And Wong probably would have been better in that concept because he was so full of fucking ego that it would have been great to see him actually have his plan accomplished. And now Domon has to beat Wong. And instead, Wong gets his head kicked off by Funsaiki.
Well, yeah, because it's just kind of like... But now it's like, Ulube is like, oh, so I need a woman to do this.
Yes, so I must give this woman to the tentacles.
But it's like...
I have a feeling we're going to get a comment on this from Rising Sun. Something along the lines of everything is better with it. There are so many hentai jokes that can be made at this point.
He should have probably been the one to figure out, oh, well, you know, the only reason why it never worked was because you were using a wrong person.
I actually would have liked it better if it wasn't Wong's files that he found. Maybe he found like a secret research book from Dr. Kashu. And so he knew the answer the entire time and Wong had just barely came across it.
It just kind of seems...
Like if he had come across Wong's note and said, "Oh, you silly goose, I knew this before," and at that point, like, you could have given more power to Ulube, but no, you didn't.
It just seems kind of like
which is appropriate considering that we find out that Ulube is such a genius later, and Wong was the guy who figured it out.
I know, and that's why it just seems like you kind of had the wires crossed on these two guys, because probably Wong would have made a way better final villain because he, with the whole ego, but yet...
Yeah, it's bullcrap.
I think you might as well have just said...
Do you see now why I'm giving this a 3? Like, there's a lot of crap they didn't think out.
Well, yeah, but I think just the ideas of how they use this to put in the plot was great. It's just, I think the roles should have been probably reversed or something like that.
Exactly. So yeah, there's final thoughts there. Let's go ahead and move into episode 47, which is Dark Colony Activated, Attack of the Shuffle Alliance. This is where our episode descriptions are going to get a little shorter, just because there's a lot overall plot-wise that's happening. And it's all going to kind of bleed into the next episode, but this is basically setting up the last 3 episodes, which are the final defeat of the Dark Gundam. And taking this into space to take care of it. But basically, what happens is Ulube takes the Dark Gundam to Neo Japan and immediately sends out a message. And I love how he puts this, because this is the one moment where, you could consider him the villain, because he immediately makes a declaration to all of the colonies that his first act as the people in charge of all of Earth and space is to abolish the Gundam fight and to immediately assert dominance over all the other colonies. Well, we ain't having any of that shit.
Jeez, what would have happened if
he basically declares war on everybody?
I know. Jeez, what would happen if...
He basically does a giant come at me, bro, to everybody. Like, that is kind of villainous.
Well, yeah, but I wonder what would have happened if Neo Japan didn't succeed in winning the Gundam fight then.
Then Wong would have done that. And it would have been better from Wong.
Yeah, then, well, Major Olube would just be like, well, never mind, maybe next 4 years.
Maybe next year.
Maybe the next 4 years I will.
Well, like he would have recovered the Dark Gundam anyway, and then he just would have said, nah, we don't acknowledge Neo Egypt winning. We say fuck you, and we have the Dark Gundam, so bye, kind of thing. But he immediately declares that the Gundam fight is done. It's completely abolished, and Neo Japan will just rule. And basically declares war on everybody else. To which we actually kind of see a reaction from all the other competitors, saying like, holy crap, all of the fights that we've all gone through now mean nothing because the Gundam fight will never happen again. And we actually start to see some of the nations retaliate against Neo Japan, specifically Neo America with the Statue of Liberty cannon. Thoughts on that one? They made the Statue of Liberty a weapon of mass destruction.
I think Chibity's like, ooh, great, I get to see the Statue of Liberty.
Well, no, he was the one that points it out. He's like, oh no, they're going to use the Statue of Liberty cannon.
I know.
It's like, really? But then again, we're going to find out about a lot of the other weapons of the colonies, and they're kind of silly. But yeah, it doesn't work. And in fact, they actually take the blast from the Statue of Liberty cannon and destroy the Statue of Liberty. Because evil! So after this all happens, actually, we should say before it. I think it happened before it. Ulube, in order to not have any interference, he immediately orders everybody in Neo Japan to go to their evacuation shelters. And the main reason being is so that the Dark Gundam can take over the Neo Japan colony. And we immediately start to see this happen of like a Dark Gundam coming out of Neo Japan, looking like this really twisted devil angel kind of thing, which kind of looks pretty cool. Like with a bunch of Gundam heads just sticking out of it. It actually is pretty cool to look at. But because of this, Neo Japan, or Domon, has had enough, and he is going to challenge the Dark Gundam. That is easily 300 times his size in the Gundam. Good luck with that, Domon. It's not gonna... This is like Transformers going up against Unicron. It makes no sense! But it's okay, because Domon's being joined by friends. As Nastasha basically breaks Neo-Russia policy, loads up all of the other Gundams into, I think they call it Groby 2, which is the ship that had all of Argo's space pirate friends. Mm-hmm. And loads up all 4 of those Gundams onto it, and immediately says, okay, we're going to help out, and I'm no longer going to work for Neo-Russia, and if it makes you feel any better, Argo, I'll join your pirate crew. Wow. Kind of wish we would have seen her in a pirate crew getup, I'm just saying. She looked pretty damn hot. But like, and we actually, I would actually like to say, like, this is the point where you got to see a true romance bud between Nastasha and Argo, because up until this point, Argo's been kind of meh about her. I mean, for crying out loud, she came out in that damn dress, and he was just like, oh, fish, and never thought about it. But now he's like, I love you, and I want to pet you right now. Sorry, pirate friends, but I must take my dick out. So, yeah, and so they follow up into space, and now the Shuffle Alliance members are also helping in this struggle. Still losing pretty bad, though. Still losing pretty bad, but that's okay, because now the colonies have officially engaged their retaliation, and the Gundam fighters in particular have decided, well, F all this, we're going to get involved, and we're going to start up the Gundam Fighter Federation, and basically kind of all decide, okay, we will protect all of the colonies despite them not being our origin. And it is led by Kirol of Neo Nepal, the guy who said that we saw, like, I will give up my Gundam and I will go atone for my sins. Oh wait, he's in Mandala Gundam again. I thought it was destroyed. Never mind. He's back, and it looks like his lieutenant is Alan B. Beardsley. So she's back in Noble Gundam, and I'm pissed because at this point they fully embrace the whole ribbons and hula hoops. Oh my god, it's so bad. Like, up until this point, they've at least made her look like a fighter in the cockpit, but now she is just doing nothing but rhythmic gymnastics in there, and I'm just like, fuck.
Jeez, that would be kind of...
This makes no sense!
Jeez, it would make you kind of sad if Alan B's like, okay, let me just use that berserker one more time and I'll freaking kick the Dark Gundam's face in.
I'm pretty sure she could, but she is they're not going to use it anymore.
I know.
And in fact, one of the things that's really cool is like all of these Gundams that were on Earth that are getting brought into space are being launched via Neo Sweden. Neo Sweden is launching them. So you have a bunch of Gundams riding rockets into space. It's kind of a good scene, right? So you get to see Ashura Gundam, you get to see Skull Gundam, Toro Gundam, Mermaid Gundam, or not Mermaid Gundam, but all the ones that were on Earth. And then you start to see the colonies' retribution with it, one of which being Neo Holland's, basically unleashing the... Oh crap, what is it called? The Hurricane Gundam Corps, where we find out that Hurricane Gundam is basically a regular mobile suit for Neo Holland, and all 40 of these windmills all come into being Gundams and launching out. And then Neo Finland joins in with their Mermaid Gundam Corps. It's like, wait. Hans, you said you had no repairing parts and you couldn't afford it? The Neo-Finland military should have been giving you spare parts because they have nothing but Mermaid Gundams.
Maybe he just didn't have any at the time to finish up the fight.
I don't buy that. I don't buy it now. I don't buy it. There's nothing but Mermaid Gundams. So, no, you had the parts. Neo-Finland was just being a jerk to Hans. Unfortunately, we don't get to see Cecile, but we do get to see Hans in a Mermaid Gundam. So you get to have all of these fights going on, but the problem is that we're fighting the exterior of the Dark Gundam, and nobody's making any dents until Dr. Mikamura, who somehow in this episode and the previous episode, he has a bullet hole in his shoulder, and he's bleeding out, and he's like 60s and 70s.
Yeah, right shoulder.
Oh, sorry, right shoulder. Shoulder. Again, bleeding chest. From the shoulder, old man. He has survived and taken a long tour through the Neo Japan colony to Dr. Kashu's cryogenic prison. And that's when he decides to die. He has walked a long time at this point, and immediately he's like, Domon, you must get into the Neo Japan colony. I will give you away. Because apparently, when you release the cryogenic tube that Dr. Kashu's in, the glass floor apparently just goes away, and he's released out into space? The fuck?
That's weird.
And so at that point, he releases Dr. Kashu and says, now, Domon! And Domon unleashes a burning finger into the hole, and that's how the Shuffle Alliance gets into the Neo Japan colony. And we'll go ahead and wrap up the episode there, because that's kind of the final moment. Final thoughts on Dark Colony activated, Attack of the Shuffle Alliance. 3.5. It's still got a lot of bullcrap that's happening that I'm feeling contrived about, but man, it's hilarious.
Yeah, I'd give it a 3.5 as well.
3.5. It is hilarious just seeing like the Hurricane Gundam Corps and the Mermaid Gundam Corps. And oh, by the way, their their carrier ship is a giant dolphin.
I thought it was a whale.
It was supposed to be the fish thing that the Mermaid Gundams can become, but it looks like a whale or a dolphin or something like that. It's like, wow, Neo Finland just is like one-track mind. It almost would have been better to see like Neo Norway come out with a giant Viking boat full of Viking Gundams. Oh, this could have gotten silly near the end of it. What did you think of basically Kirol and Allenby being the leaders of this new Gundam Fighter Federation?
It's a nice change of pace. It's better than...
They want a murderer and a magical girl.
Yeah, but would it be even more weirder for some odd, strange reason if you had Miccolo and Chapman?
Well, here's the thing: is a lot of people don't consider this, but if you look into minus Chapman and minus Miccolo, I think it was his first year as a Gundam fighter, but Chapman had been there a couple of times and he'd won Neo England 3 times. Up until that point, I think the only other veteran was Keyroll, because he had been in a couple of Gundam fights, and obviously in the Claw one where he lost his sight, and then I think they kind of hint that Keyroll did a few Gundam fights as Mandala Gundam. So he probably is the only one with veterans experience. So he makes sense. Allenby? That's her first Gundam fight too.
Yeah.
And it's not really all that encouraging to have your right-hand person using ribbons and hula hoops as your weapons. Just saying. But then again, Master Gundam was using beam sashes. No, that's still cooler than a beam ribbon, okay? I'm sorry. Like, I'm sure somebody's going to be like, well, rhythmic gymnastics. No. And it doesn't fit with Allenby. So, yeah, 3.5 out of this one. So then we get into episode 48, Earth's SOS Rescue Gundam Federation. And this is kind of where we see, I believe this is where we officially see the Gundam Federation kind of come in. But up until that point, we do see retaliations with the Dark Gundam. And, every time that they think that they've won a little bit of headway, then the Dark Gundam will just create more Gundam heads and go and fight again, kind of thing. But now we get to have the Shuffle Alliance members all inside the Neo Japan colony, trying to free the Neo Japan colony from the influence of the Dark Gundam. But wait, what about Domon's dad, you ask? Well, apparently Nastasha went out of her way to go pick up the pod, because they need Dr. Kashu. Because he's the only one that knows anything about the Dark Gundam, right? Mm-hmm. He's the official expert.
And they use the Butler Gundam.
Yeah, that's right. They use the Butler Gundam. Thank you! They use the Butler Gundam to retrieve Domon's dad. We got to see Butler Gundam again. I completely forgot about that. Why was he not in the Gundam Fighter Federation?
Why would you want him? No, could you imagine?
I need him in the Gundam Fighter Federation. Shut up.
Could you have Maria Louise using that?
Oh, God. Well, I mean, that's not the worst that this gets, because remember that Nastasha decides to help, because while they're going through the body of the Dark Gundam, they kind of need to distract it so that it's not fighting internally. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that they do is Nastasha takes her ship and creates a distraction. How does she do this? By having Zuisen and Keyun go into one set of turrets, and then having, what is his name? Raymond and Maria Louise get in there, get in the other side. And
it feels like we're in Star Wars or something.
Oh, it's cornier than that, because we get to hear about the illustrious Zuisen beam and Keyun laser, and I can't even remember what Maria Louise called hers, but it's just like, oh, fuck you. I do not want you piloting a freaking gun. I have absolutely no faith in you in any form of marksmanship. And this is what they do, is they basically try to create this distraction while the Gundam Fighter Federation is fighting off. Because at this point, the other thing that's happening is that the Dark Gundam is starting to send these tentacles to Earth. And it's starting to basically try to destroy Earth by having, like, what we're guessing is, like, it's trying to ignite the atmosphere or something like that, because it sends out all these tentacles that start lighting up the sky red. And so at that point, like, the Gundam Fighter Federation are taking out all of these tentacles that are going to Earth so that it can't destroy the Earth, while Domon is working to fight. So they get far enough in there, and then we find out from Dr. Kashu, who is now just barely waking up, that what they have to do is they have to get to a power generator that the Dark Gundam has attached itself to. And if they can get rid of that, then the Dark Gundam has no power, and they win, kind of thing. But Ulube kind of thought of that and in fact has basically made the power generator a weapon. And we find out why, because as soon as he finds out that Domon and his crew are a little farther in, he immediately goes down to the weapon. And we have the dumbest moment in this episode where we learn about Ulube's backstory, as he was the previous Neo Japan Gundam fighter in the 12th Gundam fight. And apparently he was called the Fighting Genius. Except, he got all the way up to the final round, the way they make it sound. He got all the way up to the final round and lost to How Gundam, piloted by Master Asia.
And he was
so much for a fighting genius.
Yep.
When the veteran beats you. But it gets worse because he's like, well, it's been so long, but it's a good thing I've been working on my body, and decides to do a Hulk out. And we find out that he's on way too many steroids, and decides to board what is now called Grandmaster Gundam. What this is it's basically an amalgamation of the four kings of the Dark Gundam. So its overall body is comprised of Grand Gundam. Its left arm is comprised of Volter Gundam. Its right arm, Raven Gundam. And its head is Master Gundam. And Ulube is piloting this thing. It is a big heaping mess. And I'm just going to go ahead and ask your opinion on this. Opinions on Grandmaster Gundam. Fun fact, you could actually take the toys of these four and make Grandmaster Gundam. And in my opinion, it looked at least a little better than this.
I mean, it was an interesting design, but I think it didn't seem to do very much except stand there and take all the hits from all... So it's kind of like, what a waste.
Devastator in Revenge of the Fallen looks better than this.
It's like, what a waste.
Because at least Devastator, with its ginormous wrecking ball balls, could move. This thing can't. It can barely move its arm. Especially what makes it worse is you look at the hallway that they're fighting in, and it looks like Grandmaster Gundam can barely fit in it.
I know, it's kind of like, you might as well put that thing outside and do some damage on the outside. It might.
And apparently it doesn't need a mobile tray system because of the fact that Ulube has embraced the darkness and gained his own Dark Gundam cells. He doesn't need to be in the Gundam to pilot it at all. What? In fact, you actually see him basically become kind of a gremlin when the Dark Gundam cells kind of take over his body. And it's ridiculous. We get to see them kind of throw the Shuffle Alliance around a little bit. And then finally, they all team together and do a 5-way erupting burning finger. And this is where I officially hate Domon's ending line, because it's being said by everybody. When it's being just said by Domon, it is better because it makes sense for Domon. But the first time where I would say it gets really lame is when Allenby joins him in the tag match to say, "These hands of ours are burning red." And it gets even worse when all 5 of them say, "These hands of ours are burning red." And they join their shuffle crests together to create the ultimate erupting burning finger, which does destroy Grandmaster Gundam along with Major Ulube. Bye, Ulube.
Well, I didn't think it was that bad.
I hate it because it makes sense from Domon because we've seen it happen with Domon. But then you start to see everybody else do it with him, and it kind of becomes corny at that point.
Okay, then if you were to do like a team attack like that, how would you have done it differently?
I would have actually had them do all of their attacks. I wouldn't have had them all do 5 different burning fingers with a speech there. I would have actually, like, if they wanted to join in and say stuff, I wouldn't have had all 5 of them speaking together. I would have had them each saying a piece. So, like, George starts with, "This hand of mine is burning red." Then Chibity, "Its bright cry tells me to grasp victory." And then give Chibity and or not Chibity, Argo and Saisaishi something to say there.
So they get a
and instead of 5 different burning fingers, you get
maybe using their own ability.
You get bursting machine gun punch. You get Rose Hurricane. You get butterfly mode. I'm not saying it. And
Giga
Graviton Hammer is what we get, because we actually get this attack later or before. Actually, no, before it. And that's better, in my opinion, because that way you're not just all imitating one Gundam that has one theme.
True.
It's better to be able to see all the other stuff. And by the way, why did Argo never use Gaia Crusher in the Neo Japan colony? Don't you think that would have saved a whole ton of time? Because he could have just wrecked the colony. All right? He could have just wrecked it.
Was it this episode, or was it another episode where you see the king go flying?
We're getting to that. We're getting to that. It's the next one.
Oh.
But final thoughts on Earth's SOS Rescue Gundam Federation.
I give it
still kind of a 3.5. There's a lot going on, and it's kind of hard to get invested in any of it.
I give it a 3.
There's still too much going on. Like you're following way too many things. You're invested in what's happening with the Dark Gundam tentacles going to Earth and having to take care of those. And then you also are invested in the Shuffle Alliance fight with Grandmaster Gundam. There's too much. There's too much at that point. But we then move on into the climax of Mobile Fighter G Gundam with episode 49. Burning Gundam's Great Triumph, Hopeful Future, Ready, Go. So we then get to go into the kind of the final battles here. And we also start to lose a little bit of hope as Dr. Kashu notices that, unfortunately, even though they took out the power generator that Grandmaster Gundam was a part of, Grandmaster Gundam is self-recovering. So immediately, the Shuffle Alliance sends Domon on his way. They need to get to the Dark Gundam. He needs to get to Rain. He has to end this. He has to get to Rain, and maybe if they can get Rain out of there, or they can beat Rain, then they can beat this. Especially since we've now had another interesting twist. The Dark Gundam has grown wings, and it intends to crash into the Earth. It will destroy humanity at any cost, including running the Neo Japan colony into Earth. And so now we have kind of a timetable. It has the power to do this. Domon must stop Rain. And he immediately starts racing to do that. All the while we have all of these tentacles like going over, and we get to see Kirol and Allenby doing their best to be able to fight this off. In fact, one of the coolest moments with the Gundam Fighter Federation is we get to see Mandala Gundam's final attack, which is basically he takes all of the Gundams that are under his command, puts them all into this giant mandala, and shoots them out to destroy these tentacles, which is kind of a cool thing to see. And I really wish we could have seen this with just Kirol executing it. But while this is going on, we're also having a big discussion here of, is freeing Rain going to be enough? Can they free Rain? Do they have to destroy Rain along with the Dark Gundam to stop this? And will Domon do that? Can Domon do that? To which we end up at basically where the core area of the Dark Gundam is, and we immediately get to see what a lot of people call the final form of the Dark Gundam. And fun fact, if you tried to buy the toys or the models of the Dark Gundam, this is the model that you pretty much can ever find. I've seen one where you can get a detachable upper unit that had like the original Ultimate Gundam design, but this is the one that you find, which is basically giant Gundam head with the tiny thing on top of it, and all of these big hulky moving parts, creating either giant tentacle-like hands or giant feet. And we get to have our final fight with the Dark Gundam all the while. And we should point this out. I actually wonder if you found this offensive. When you see Rain in the cockpit of the Dark Gundam, it comes out as like this really twisted flower. And basically she's out there with wires all over her, totally silver. And, well, it's like the top half of her body. So she's pretty much exposed at this point. Did you find that a problem, offensive, or anything like that?
Well,
I've talked to some people that thought that was offensive, that all of a sudden Rain would come out and, like, breastises exposed and all that. And it's like, well, but, here's the thing. She is coming out as like a silver statue. So it's not that bad, but I can get why some people might have issues. But I want to hear from a woman's perspective, like, is that offensive?
Well, it's kind of unusual, but she looks like just a metal statue.
Yeah, does it impose, like, any kind of intimidation or fear to you? I mean, to me, like, when I first saw it, it looked kind of creepy. Just because it's Rain, but it's not Rain, if that makes sense.
I think it was just kind of, like, strange.
Yeah. And what makes it even worse is, like, the way that you see this is, like, the cockpit or the chest section of the Dark Gundam kind of melts away, and then you see it. It's just like, I'm not sure that's how metal works, but okay. So we get to have, like, a confrontation going on between this Dark Gundam and Domon, and Domon is losing. He's getting his butt handed to him in so many different ways because this Gundam is bigger than him. It's stronger than him. He can't do this the way that he usually does. He can't just end this with a burning finger and move on. And eventually people start coming to the conclusion of, okay, if you can reach out to Rain, maybe then, without a core life unit, the Dark Gundam will just die on its own. And so a lot of people are saying, like, if he can just appeal to Rain and talk to her, maybe she can then disengage from it and it'll die on its own because it doesn't have a core life unit anymore. And this is where this gets so corny because everybody knows what Domon has to say to get Rain to disengage, right? Safe assessment, everybody knows what he has to say.
Everybody knows, and they're just like...
And so at this point, Domon's like, I don't know what I can do. This is all I know how to do. And this is my other problem with Alan B, because Alan B kind of comes in, and if people have seen the second opening, Trust You Forever, I've never liked this interpretation of Alan B where she comes in like a little fairy and tries to answer his question. He's like, you don't want to paint her as a woman, do you? You just don't. You're either going to paint her as like a little boy or as Tinkerbell. One of the two, you don't want to paint her as a woman, but you have to in the fight suit, otherwise it doesn't make sense. The fuck? Just give her womanly traits and move on. Like, we've all kind of come to the assumption she wears pink, she's in a magical girl Gundam. We get it, she's a girl. Just be honest about that, right? Even Cecile looked feminine.
Mm-hmm.
But Alan B's never been allowed to do that. And so we have that moment where she looks like a little fairy coming in to tell Domon what he needs to say, which is just, you need to tell her how you feel. This is obviously something Domon has had nothing but trouble doing. This entire series, he has never been able to do it properly. And so it's just like, well, we're all doomed because he can't do it. He can't do it. But thankfully, the Shuffle Alliance comes in and says, just say it to her. You know you want to say it to her. So he gets out of the burning Gundam and immediately goes into what he was going to say to her after he came home from the finals. And at that point, he goes into a recollection of their past year and how he has appreciated having her with him and how he can't see himself living life without having her around. And he even explains his own insecurities. I'm a fighter. I like how he says this. I'm a fighter who's ill at ease unless I'm speaking with my fists. And that's why this is so hard. But basically finally admits and says the 3 words that everybody's been screaming that he has to say, which is technically 4, I love you, Rain. And that immediately, the power of love shatters the statue and immediately ejects Rain into the vacuum of space. Because we're not sure if oxygen actually exists where they are.
I didn't think.
And sends her out stark-ass naked.
I don't think she was in space. I thought it was just inside.
Well, this is something that a lot of people debate, is because we're in the internal workings of a colony. And so at that point, a lot of the maintenance tunnels that get shown in other Gundam series kind of hint at the fact, since you have to access it via a spacesuit or a mobile suit, there's never air there. It's always vacuum. It's just considered a part of space. And when you enter the colony, that's when it becomes like an actual environment kind of thing.
I thought we were just like in the tunnels of...
But these are the tunnels of the inner workings of the Neo-Japan colony.
Yeah, so that's
why you're going to the power generator and everything like that. And so at that point, like, to me, you're ejecting Rain into vacuum, which she should instantly die from, and you're ejecting her stark-ass naked. Was she not wearing a dress before this?
Was she?
Apparently, she had to be naked in order for the tentacles to take over. I know the bad image that I just sent through everybody's head, but it's not me that did it. It's the show. I have to ask this, as a woman, your reaction to all of this happening. I love you, Rain. Domon!
It's almost as funny as with the whole Master Asia's like, launch me.
Launch me, Domon! Launch me, Domon!
Say I love you.
Oh my gosh. Oh, and what makes it even worse is, okay, so perfectly, I don't know how he did it, but Domon caught her. And immediately wraps her in his cloak that he's been using this entire time. And it's very loosely around her, might we add. And immediately they realize, oh, but the Dark Gundam is not happy that Rain has left and will take her back at any cost. So at that point, it's time for their hands to burn red as they decide to do another boyfriend-girlfriend burning finger this time.
They're doing a duet.
Except now it looks like a tango because she is trying to keep this cloak on her and it's supposed to look like a dress. First of all, I call bullshit because some of the movements that they try to pull off, that cloak would have flown off. That cloak would have just fucking flown off. And she would have been naked as a wee baby. And this would have become officially inappropriate for children. So we have that moment, and this is what you were talking about, because it's a Seki Ha-Ten Kyoken mixed with a burning finger. And immediately, because of the power of love, the crest of the King of Hearts becomes the King of Hearts. And he's like, "Urgh!" And immediately gets launched at the Dark Gundam, leaving, and I shit you not, a heart-sized hole in the Dark Gundam. Just thoughts on that moment, too.
That was all corny.
I'm guessing even as a woman, you have a corny filter. Did this pass it? Did this get too corny?
That was too corny.
That was? Because I think you and I were both laughing at this point. Yeah.
Man, it was just taken down. The big, huge Dark Gundam was taken down by the power of love.
And the King of Hearts. In pink. He officially looked dorkier than George. I have no problem saying that. The King of Hearts looked dorkier than George.
George still needs a new leotard.
Yes, he does. but that's beside the point. So they immediately evacuate, and the Dark Gundam blows up, and thankfully it doesn't take Neo Japan with it. In fact, whatever's left is basically bones on the Neo Japan colony, and we get to have this nice discussion between Kurado and Dr. Kashu about, okay, now that we've learned the problems of the Gundam fight, now we can do it right. Now we don't have to worry about, okay, this is just the ideal war. We don't have to worry about this Dark Gundam problem becoming a thing again. And we get to kind of wrap things up with Burning Gundam Onfun Psyche, who is now projecting these beam angel wings and flying back to Earth because Domon and Rain have decided they're going to go back to the Earth, to where they've been spending their year, and they're gonna live their days there. And we get some resolution here. We get to see Chibity with his 4 moms. God damn it. We get to see George holding Princess Marie Louise. Why? She's still a teenager.
Well, she's hugging him, and he's like, oh.
Yeah, that's right, because he was kind of hesitant. And I think you even see Raymond, like, pop a cork on a wine bottle to celebrate. Saishi is with his 2 dads. And Argo.
Oh, yeah, because he was also trying to hold the picture of Cecile.
Oh, that's right. He was kissing a picture of Cecile. So at that point, kind of hinting that maybe, you know, this series could get a season 2 and he'd be able to see Cecile again. Spoiler alert, that never happened. Mm-hmm. And what's even better is we then go to Argo and Nastasha, who's in the cockpit, and you see this big lip imprint on Argo's cheek in the darkest possible lipstick you could possibly imagine. And he's just like, I have kiss on cheek. I don't care. By the way, I also forgot to mention this, that as part of their launch into space, Nastasha also betrays her government and frees Argo. We actually see her eject the bomb out of his chest, or out of his chest strap thing, and she takes the cuffs off. Mm-hmm. and he's free again. So he technically won, but unfortunately, Sasaishi did not get the revival of the Shaolin Temple. Chibity did not get his American dream.
What was his American dream?
His American dream was just to be the top. Oh. To show the example of the American dream, that you can rise up from the streets to become the greatest Gundam, the Gundam of Gundams, kind of thing.
Couldn't you just consider that your American dream?
You could technically make the argument Chibity won that.
You like basically helped save the lives of the world.
You could also argue that George kind of won too, because he fought for the honor of Neo France, even though he didn't win. So like it's one of those things where like it's weird. Chibity and George didn't have tangible things attached to theirs, so they technically won regardless. Sasaishi did have a tangible thing. It didn't happen, but he's okay because he still has Cecile in his life. Argo did win. Like, he got what he wanted. And I'm going to tell you, the audience didn't get what they wanted, because they wanted to see Nastasha in like a pirate getup, or even better, as like a pirate wench. That would have been even better, is if she like embraced her femininity and just became the pirate wench. I would have loved that. But no, instead you just get the lip imprint on Argo's face. Just to say, oh yes, we are dating now. And they kind of end that and have kind of a final screen of like, we'll see you at the 14th Gundam fight.
Which never happens.
And kind of have a final goodbye for everybody else. And that wraps up Mobile Fighter G Gundam. So, final thoughts on Burning Gundam's Great Triumph, A Hopeful Future, ready, go.
I'll probably give it a 5.
Okay. I'm going to give it a 4, just because of some of the corniness that happened near the end. And unfortunately, the other thing that I'm disappointed about is that they do hint a lot at like a season 2 of G Gundam, and it never happened. And I actually would have liked to have seen an older Saishi and Cecile meet up again. I would have liked to have had like a resolution on Domon going to the 14th Gundam fight with Rain and them being married, kind of thing. That would be cool. Seeing a relationship between Argo and Nastasha, that would have been great. Doesn't happen, Because unfortunately, G Gundam was not as successful in Japan as it obtained niche success here. It was not as successful in Japan, so they immediately moved to the next project that they had, which was at this point was the 8th Mobile Suit Team. So, yeah, I'm gonna give it a 4 just because of unresolved stuff and kind of being silly near the end. And also, please, like, Allenby should never have been painted the way that she was. Because here's the thing. I've been making fun of Allenby a lot, but when we get into that final episode and final assessment on some characters, people are going to find I actually have a very positive outlook on Allenby. I like her. I like what she contributed to the story, despite the jealousy plot line. But it pisses me off that the animators were so intent on drawing her either as a boy or as Tinkerbell. They never wanted to show her being a woman. And I think that they failed in that regard. Because all you did was you made us all sit there and go, well, why couldn't you have made Domon or Allenby like legit competition for Rain? Or something like that. Because, well, she was pretty hot in her own right. So, yeah, there you go. Let's go ahead and get into our last run of these questions before we wrap this up, because this is also obviously going to be a very long episode. The best episode here of the 5 that we saw. I'm going to beat you to this. Farewell Master, Master Acia's Last Breath. It's one of my favorite episodes of the series.
I was probably going to go with the same one too, but you know.
Okay, worst episode.
The worst one would be
Grandmaster Gundam, Earth's SOS, Rescue Gundam Federation. And the Crusade of Ulube the Pointless.
Probably the second one after the first one we watched.
So Rain's Crisis, Return of the Dark Gundam.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
You just didn't like the tentacles, did you?
I just didn't like the whole thing of Rain deciding, well, goodbye, Domo.
We'll get into that with Rain in final character development. Yeah, no, that's appropriate. Okay, of the fight scenes that we saw in this one, we have, to determine which one was the best of this grouping, we have Master Gundam versus Burning Gundam, the final battle in the Gundam fight. We then have, since there technically wasn't one in episode 46, I'm also going to... Actually, no, we did have one. It was Burning Gundam versus Walter Gundam with Wang Yunfa as the pilot. Then we have... I guess we could put in the Gundam Federation or the Gundam Fighter Federation versus the Dark Gundam. Then we can have the Shuffle Alliance versus Grandmaster Gundam. And finally, Burning Gundam versus the Dark Gundam, aka Rain, I Love You. Burning Gundam versus Master Gundam. Don't have to think about it. That's the best fight in these 5.
Of course. I mean, that was probably the most awesome.
Worst fight, Grandmaster Gundam. Don't even have to think about it. It wasn't a fight. One part of this whole fight couldn't move.
How about the very, very, very last fight?
I'm okay with it.
I know it's like you're okay with it, but if it took to just say I love you just to defeat it, man, we would have been done a long, long, long time ago.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like that's what actually makes this the best thing. Domon can't beat this the way he's beaten everybody else. He has to do what he's never done. Mm-hmm. I like that. The hard-headed Domon has his worst challenge yet. He has to say the 3 words he doesn't want to say, which is why they are the title of this episode. Say the words, Domon.
It's like, man, Domon, all you had to do was just say I love you to your brother. You could have saved him. That would have been awkward.
To say the least. Kind of incesty too there, buddy.
Oh.
Starting to think my wife believes in incest is wincest. No! That's a bad Andrea. That's a bad Andrea.
What?
So we won't get into our final thoughts on G Gundam. That is for next episode, which we will be recording a week from now. Then after that, I'm not sure if this is going to be a live stream or just a Q&A, but I'm going to go ahead and let you guys know right here and now. If you have questions about something that maybe we didn't cover in the episodes, or if you want to know what did we think about this particular character turn with Rain and Domon, or with Saisaishi, I'm going to go ahead and let you guys know. Go ahead and submit those questions to geekyweek@gmail.com, and we will answer them in one big episode after the next one. The next one's going to be kind of the final assessment on characters, plot, etc., maybe even best and worst mobile suits, things like that, because it is Gundam, and Mecha is part of that. But we're going to save that for next episode. This is just to take care of the last 5 episodes in the series. And then after that, either we're going to live stream it or we're just going to pre-record it and ask the questions. But leave those questions at geekyweek@gmail.com. Or you can also leave it on the YouTube comments. But please leave them there. And I will gather them up and we will answer them either live or not live. I'm not sure which yet. So you guys can look forward to next week when we do our final assessment. Best characters, worst characters. What did this show do right? What did it do wrong? Kind of thing. Because I want to give Andrea about a week to think and think about all of this as a whole. And say like, okay, did this work for me? Did this not work for me? And also the other question that I want you to consider over this week, Andrea, is you have now had access to a franchise that has lasted since the 70s. Does this encourage you to move on to a new season or series within the Gundam franchise? And I don't want you to answer now. I want you to consider it. Kind of thing. I want you to think about it and see if this series alone was enough of a gateway drug for you to want to learn more. Kind of thing. So that, without further ado, you guys will see this on YouTube pretty soon, and we are getting really close to the holidays, so I'm just going to go ahead and start saying happy holidays. We will see you guys next week for the final episode of the G Gundam podcast before Q&A. Until then, we will see you guys at the 13th G Gundam podcast episode.
Ready?